If you feel like you don't get enough done in the day, this conversation is for you. In this episode, we're delighted to have Gloria Mark, Chancellor's Professor Emerita at the University of California, Irvine. She studies the impact of digital media on people's work and personal lives, examining multitasking, attention, and stress. And let me tell you, social media does have an impact on your life. She joined us to discuss her book, Attention Span, a groundbreaking way to restore balance, happiness, and productivity. We explore the repercussions of a week without email on productivity and stress, the unintended outcomes of technology, the pros and cons of AI, and the ongoing struggle to stay focused amid constant digital distractions. Enjoy the conversation. Good morning, Gloria. Where I'd love to dive into our conversation today is a quote from your book, Attention Span. And what you wrote was, we need to change the conversation from adjusting our lives to being maximally productive to adjusting our lives to feeling balanced. Our goal when we use our devices should be to maintain a positive store of mental resources so we can ultimately experience a higher level of well-being. As a result, we'll be more productive. That quote will give our listeners and viewers a very good idea of what we're going to be talking about today. Do you want to color that in for them and let them know where we'll be going in our conversation today?
Sure. Yeah, so the common narrative is that, technology should enhance our productivity. And in fact, that was the original intent for developing computer technology. It enabled people to produce information faster. For example, people could write directly themselves on their computers and edit and print. The problem is that we've developed this culture where we feel pushed to produce as much as possible because we have the technology to do so. But as a result, we're getting ourselves exhausted. And we know this from empirical studies. We have evidence that shows that people are getting stressed and exhausted on their personal devices. Now, what's behind this is that people have a limited amount of cognitive resources. You can think of it as attentional capacity, but in any case, we have a limited amount. We don't have an infinite supply of attention. And so we have to be very careful about how we allocate this attention, because when we're drained of these attentional resources, we get ourselves exhausted, right? We're stressed, we're drained. So that's why it's so important to achieve a balance when we use our devices, to be very much aware that our ultimate goal is actually happiness and well-being, right? And there's also research that shows if you're happy, you will be more productive, you'll be more creative, you can generate more ideas, you have more energy. So that's the idea behind this.
And one of the terms you mentioned there, I thought maybe we could dive a little bit deeper into is the idea of attentional capacity. I'm almost picturing like a fuel tank for our attention, and there's only so much attention or cognitive ability, if you will, that we have during the day. Is that analogy reasonably accurate, or what else might you use? And are there any other terms that we should lay out for the listeners in advance that are going to help them as we weave our way through this conversation?
No, I think using a tank as a metaphor is a very good one, because, you can think of it as if you get a really good night's sleep, if you take really good breaks, you can keep your tank full. But there's things we do during the day that deplete the tank, such as long, intensive periods of focusing, because that creates a strain, shifting our attention, multitasking, trying to shift between different tasks. There's a lot of things. There are things that emotionally drain us that also affect our attention. So I think the tank is a really good way to look at this, to consider what fills the tank and what depletes the tank.
And something that jumps out at me, we'll take a step back and come out of the book for a minute. But if you remember back to 2020, depending on where you lived, work from home orders go in place. We all come home. And that goes on and off for about 3 years. And during that time, Gloria, as someone with ADHD, when I'm in the workplace setting, you have meetings in person. You're going from meeting to meeting. You're talking to your colleagues face to face. No devices present. You're able to zone in, be present, get things done, go to your next meeting, periodic sessions at the keyboard for your work. But then all of a sudden, for a period of 2 to 3 years, you're sitting in an office by yourself at your house or in your kitchen, and you're looking at monitors all day long. And someone tells you, well, just pay attention to the person in the monitor right there. Ignore those other two monitors you have on your desk that have emails and work going. And to me, I felt like maybe it was my ADHD, but in reading the book, it doesn't seem maybe it was just that. It was the human population as a whole. I had never felt more stressed, less productive, and maybe not less productive because there was output, but I never felt my attention span dwindling as much as it did during that 3 year period. And I know you wrote the book during COVID. Has there been research showing the implications of COVID work from home policies without actual face-to-face contact and what that did to our attention spans?
Yeah, we have some research. So during the pandemic, along with colleagues from Microsoft Research, we did study this, and people reported having a much harder time focusing. But there's so many other issues that were going on at the same time. For example, people experience more loneliness. And of course, there's a lot of other ideas and emotions that we experience that can affect our attention. So feeling lonely, of course, can be distracting for you. It can interfere with your ability to concentrate. And of course, people who are distracted by things in their home as well. And, the pile of dirty laundry or the dishes that need to be washed, or if you were a caretaker for kids or for aging parents. So there were a lot of other things going on. The other thing that made it really challenging was that Zoom meetings, and of course we all had to move to Zoom, they tended to be scheduled back to back. So you had a meeting at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 a.m. And we had no time for a transition between these meetings. So be in a meeting, expected to give your full attention, and then it would end, and you had about 20 seconds to get on to your next meeting. And contrast that with what we did in physical work environments, where, at least you could walk to another meeting room, or you might walk back to your office. And at least that gave you a time of transition. You can kind of clear your head. The other thing that happens in physical face-to-face settings is that we can do chit chat. We can have informal social interaction before a meeting, after a meeting. And this helps people relax. It helps us get to know our colleagues. And Zoom meetings tend to be very formal. And of course, that has an impact on our attention because we don't have the time to just kind of chill and get to know people and relax. And I know that some managers intentionally schedule social time before meetings and after meetings. And we did a study on that, and we found that it was pretty effective.
The idea of taking a 10-minute break between meetings is such a beautiful idea in hindsight. You're giving me a bit of nightmares remembering back to some of those days where it felt like I have a little separate office in my backyard, and I'd walk in here and go on a Zoom call. It felt like at 7 in the morning and be done at 6 at night. It was just, I don't ever want to be in that situation in life again, Gloria.
No one does.
So when it comes to our control over our attention, one of the quotes that stood out for me was you had a quote by William James, who you noted was the father of psychology. I loved that. Who said, "Millions of items of the outward order are present to my senses, which never properly enter into my experience. Why? Because they have no interest for me. My experience is what I agree to attend to." Can you expand on that one for us, Gloria?
Yeah.
How can modern technology interface with that idea?
Yeah. So William James was talking about selective attention. We pay attention to what we choose to pay attention to. Now, you may not even want to pay attention to something, but we're sometimes forced to because of work, or because if you're a student, you have to pay attention to doing some reading for class. But in any case, it is ultimately a choice of where people selectively attend to. And what we attend to is what enters into our consciousness. So, I have so many things going on around in my environment. I have an air conditioner on and I'm not paying attention to it until I actually look at it and realize that the air conditioner is on. My selective attention is going toward that air conditioner. But otherwise, my attention is on you on the podcast because that's what I'm selectively choosing to enter into my consciousness.
And in that choice, Gloria, how do we get power or strengthen our willpower, if you will, to make those right choices when that information is just always coming at us, whether it's the algo, AI?
Yeah, there are things that we can do. So one of the things that I found works very well for me is to probe myself so that I can better understand and reflect on where I'm paying attention. And, this idea actually came from something I experienced during the pandemic. So my university offered a course in mindfulness. And, I always wanted to take a course in mindfulness. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with this or do it themselves. But mindfulness teaches you to focus on the present. And the idea is, the past is about regret, the future is about anxiety, but in the present, right? This is what we have, this is what's real. And I realized that when I'm on my devices, I could improve the way that I focus by thinking in terms of the present. And there's so many things that happen when we're on our devices. We might get a memory that we forgot to do something. We have an urge. This is a big one. It's an urge to check email or social media or the news, right? And we have this urge and we want to respond to it. But if we can learn to recognize those urges, we can reflect on it, try and understand, why do we have this urge to do something? And we can come up with a plan. There are so many actions we do when we use our computers and phones that are just non-conscious. When I see my phone, for example, here, and I immediately grab it, and that's an unconscious reaction, right? It's a habit. And I'm not fully conscious of actually grabbing my phone, swiping it open, but I can reflect on it and I can say, wait a minute, why do I have that urge to grab that phone? Or why do I have that urge to go on social media? It's usually, when I've probed myself, it's usually because I don't want to do the thing that I'm supposed to do right now. I'm just not interested. It's work that I have to do and I'm not interested. So I would so much rather read the news because it's easy, right? It's fun, maybe not always fun. And so once you become aware of why you're becoming so distracted, you can form a plan and then you can become more intentional in your actions. And the idea is to make these unconscious actions more conscious for you, to raise them to your conscious awareness. And just like when I talked earlier about the air conditioner, it's going on, it's making a noise. I'm not paying attention to it until I actually think about it, and then I am, right? So we do have a choice. We do have a choice of where to pay attention, and making that choice is about being intentional and being aware that, we are distracted by lots of unconscious things that are going on in our mind. And we have to become aware of those things and create a plan. For example, if I have an urge to go on social media, how about if I create a plan? I'm going to work 20 more minutes and then I'll reward myself by going to social media.
And give yourself that space. And the interesting one was you quoted an experiment that showed over a period of time, when we exert cognitive control, we become more impulsive and gradually relinquish our ability to filter out the distractions. Can you take our listeners through that experiment and what the implications for that are, and what you refer to as cognitive fatigue, which seems to lower our ability to control our attentional capacity?
That's right. So there's a part of the mind that's called executive function. And executive function, it's a pretty important part of the mind. You can think of it as the CEO of your mind, the governor of your mind. And it controls our decision making. It's what we use to decide what to focus on. But also importantly, it helps us filter out distractions. So it helps us stay on track, and it helps us, keeps our mind away from all the peripheral stuff that might interfere with our task at hand. Now, if you're spending a long period of time using that executive function, which could be in trying to focus on something, doing some kind of hard task for a long period of time, you can wear it down, right? You can get it exhausted. And then executive function no longer has the capability to do its job, and it can't be effective in filtering out distractions. So, you might see on the internet, there's lots of advertisements for achieve nonstop focus, or here's how to focus for 10 hours at a time. Well, that's not realistic, because our executive function just doesn't allow us to do that for 10 hours at a time or extended nonstop. We need to take breaks and we need to replenish, right? Again, we have these limited cognitive resources, and we need to make sure we're running on a full tank.
Now, is there a way, like our biceps or the bench press in the gym, is there a way to strengthen and build our executive function like a muscle?
Well, I would say there is, by making sure we take really good breaks, to make sure we get a really good night's sleep, because then executive function is really fresh. It can work at its full capacity. So the important thing is to just not wear it down. And of course, what I talked about before, the idea of understanding reasons for why you're distracted and making these unconscious actions more conscious. This is another thing we can do, is to retrain ourselves so that we don't respond to every urge we have to be distracted. So there are things that we can do.
So let's talk about the importance of lunch hour. And I'll love for you to share your experience in Germany. And I've always felt similarly to that, even when I was at a Big Four accounting firm working crazy hours, to me, lunch hour has always been somewhat sacred. At least 45 minutes, grab lunch, ideally away from my desk. Ideally, nowadays, I like to go for a 30-minute, 35-minute walk, stop at a cafe, have a couple small salad, walk back to the office, ideally with a colleague, having conversation on the walk, talking during the sit down for the meal, short meal. You're back in the office in an hour and 15. And I've always felt way more productive in that second half of the day than were I to do what seems to be so common in North America, where I just grab the takeout sandwich and sit in front of my computer munching the carbs while typing away at my work. Is there research that supports that? I know you anecdotally have felt the same way in your own life, but do we have support for doing this in the workplace?
Yeah, it's really important to take a substantial break. And lunch hour is just a great break because we're not only pulling ourselves away from our devices. Hopefully, you're not doing your email or, checking social media during your lunch break, but really pulling away and doing something else, eating, refueling our bodies, going out, taking a walk. In fact, there is a lot of research that shows that being out in nature can really significantly de-stress us. And even research that I've done shows that a 20-minute walk in nature can make people significantly more creative. It's called divergent thinking, which is like brainstorming, thinking of lots of different ideas. We had some people who spent 20 minutes, we had them, at their desk, but doing something else. And other people, 20 minutes actually being outside in nature. And for those people who were in nature, they came up with more ideas and better ideas as measured by validated tests that could be taken. So there is research that supports what you're saying. People can perform better. And again, it goes back to that idea of that tank of cognitive resources or attentional capacity. By the time lunchtime rolls around, it's starting to wane. And so we have to pull back, build that tank, the resources in that tank up again. And eating, taking a nice walk, it's a great way to do it.
And something that gets in the way of our managing that tank is a term that you coined that I liked called attention traps. So what are attention traps, Gloria? And we don't have to work through all of them, but what are one or two that jump out at you that trap us throughout the day and take our attention away? You think you're just going to quickly look at your internet, and 45 minutes later, you're done your doom scrolling on your Instagram. I mean, the fact that we have a term called doom scrolling and you just see the kids just flicking their TikTok videos up and up for 45 minutes straight is mind-boggling to me. So what do you see as some of these attention traps, and what is an attention trap?
So an attention trap, it's a behavioral pattern that is really hard to break out of. And it's a pattern that involves your attention. And we've all experienced attention traps. One example of a trap is what I call the rote attention trap. We all like to do things that are engaging and easy for us. And I want to point out, it's really not bad to do those for a short period of time. It can help us replenish. The problem is that when you get stuck in a trap, for example, playing a mindless game, it's not bad to do it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? It's not bad at all. The problem is when we get trapped and we end up doing it for hours. You go down a rabbit hole and, you're trying to kill the zombies or get more points and you just can't pull away. And we've got a lot of better things we need to do. That's one example of our attention getting trapped. Another example of an attention trap, well, there's social media, of course. People can get trapped in social media. You talked about doom scrolling. TikTok is a really great example of this. People can get trapped because there's going to be some video that comes along that's just going to be hilarious. And so we're just waiting for that next hilarious video. And then it comes along, and then we keep thinking, oh, there's going to be another one soon. And you just get trapped into waiting for that next video to come. And before you know it, 2 hours have gone by. So that's definitely a trap.
And let's stay on that one for a second, because the social media is becoming, it feels like, a more and more powerful attention trap. And what does it mean to you when we say our distraction is being paid for? And how does it tie to those little boots just following you around throughout the days and weeks
Yeah.
for our listeners? And how does it tie into that TikTok algorithm? And now it feels like Twitter's trying to replicate the TikTok algorithm pretty
Yeah.
poorly, but it's attempting to.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. It's about algorithms, and tech companies have designed algorithms to entrap our attention. We leave digital traces when we're on the internet. And, there's a lot of things we do. We look at different websites. If you're going shopping, I use the example of looking at a pair of boots on the internet, or you go on social media, you like certain things. All of that information, all those digital traces are captured about it. And it's used by tech companies to create a psychological profile about each individual. And based on that, tech companies can gear ads and notifications according to what they feel interests you, based on your personality, based on your past activity. So, in the book, I talk about, and it's based on a real experience where I looked at a pair of boots and then they followed me around on the internet. Wherever I went to the New York Times and there was this ad for the pair of boots, went on Facebook and there were the pair of boots. That was the algorithm following me around because it knows at some point I'm just going to succumb and click and buy those boots and, make that ad go away by purchasing it. So yeah, TikTok is a really interesting example. TikTok learns a lot about its users. It learns, what they like, what they don't like. It gets contextual information like time of day that people are looking at TikTok videos. It creates profiles of people. It can look at what you're doing in relation to other people who share characteristics with you. So it gets so much information that it can tune its algorithm to be, pretty precise to present you with videos that TikTok believes you're going to be interested in. And when you keep getting fed videos that are interesting for you, it's really hard to pull away. So we get glued to the site, right? Because anyone would get glued to a site where you keep getting things that are interesting for you. So algorithms are getting more and more sophisticated and, more and more powerful and precise in targeting our interests.
And it's not just the algorithms. Like, if we take a step back, it's even the content. And you talk about this with the idea that the length of shots has just gotten shorter and shorter over time. I was listening to a conversation yesterday on the drive into work, and the radio hosts were talking about, they call it the millennial pause now, where if you take someone above a certain age and they go to record, for example, when we record the podcast, when we pressed play, we had the 5-second countdown. And then I took a second and I asked the first question. And what they said is, this next generation, when you start their YouTube videos, you don't even start the video and then start talking. The video starts in their mid-word, because they know that if they have that even 1 second pause before they start talking, someone's going to just scroll to the next video. I mean, that scares me if an attention span has gotten that short. But what were you seeing with how fast and how many cuts they'll do in a 30-second video?
Yeah. So we're talking about shots with film and TV. And those have been documented, shortened over the years. So, film and TV shot lengths used to be like 12, 15 seconds. They're now down to an average of about 4 seconds. And if you turn on your TV and turn the audio completely down, you'll really notice it. We tend not to notice it so much when the audio is playing, but if you're just looking visually, you'll see how these shots change. Now, it's very pronounced if you watch MTV music videos, if you watch blockbuster films like Michael Bay's Transformers, you'll really notice how those shot lengths are whipping your mind back and forth. In fact, those kinds of blockbuster films, they shift shots so fast that it's almost especially designed for people to use their phones during the film, because you can pull away, you can check your social media account, come right back to the film, and you haven't missed anything. You've missed part of the chaos, but you haven't really missed part of the plot because it's moving so fast. So yeah, I can't say it's a cause for our short attention spans, but I will say that it reinforces us to have short attention spans, because we can't make a causal claim. We can't say short shots caused us to have short attention spans, because it could be that the film and TV directors and editors, maybe they're influenced by their own short attention spans. Maybe they're keeping shot lengths short because that's what they believe people will pay attention to. So they might be basically conforming to short attention spans that already exist.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy what you're hearing so far and want me to be able to get your favorite guests on this show, please do me a quick favor. Subscribe to the show and leave me a rating. The 30 seconds of your time will mean a ton to me. What about the situation with our kids where you see not only do they like the videos that are moving that quickly, but you talked about watching a feature-length film. And you're watching a feature-length film as a family. You've got the Netflix on, watching the top movie. And your kids want to have their devices in their hands, scrolling their socials while they're watching this video. Is that good or bad for their attention span? And why are we seeing so much desire for not only multitasking during the workspace, but like multitasking your social watching TV game?
It's not good. It's habitual behavior. Kids have learned that, just through habit, that they need to keep checking social media. There's a lot of reasons behind it. So, we're social creatures and we seek social rewards. And this is especially strong with teenagers and young kids. They're so tied to social relationships, right? They want to be part of a group, they want to be accepted. And so this also is a driver for them to keep checking their devices. And so it's a combination of getting the social rewards, wanting to, be socially accepted. Young people, we've studied young people, and they report that they just can't give up social media because it's like, a social death for them. Their groups wouldn't include them anymore. So they have to keep being part of this. Now, should they do it while they're watching Netflix? No, of course not. They shouldn't. And this is something I think parents should help their kids with, right? To teach their kids that it's not a good practice to do that. And that kids have to learn that at the least little thing, when in a film, it might start to get boring, may not keep their interest up. They shouldn't just suddenly turn to their phones, but, keep at it, keep watching.
And in this whole situation, everything we've been talking about, it's one of the things that stuck out to me about it is 47 seconds. So what is 47 seconds and why is that so relevant to this conversation we're having today?
Yeah, it's the whole crux of the matter. 47 seconds is the average length of attention that we found that people have on their devices, their computers, tablets, phones, before they switch to do something else. So, we first started studying this about 20 years ago. And the first time we published this was 2004. We did the study in 2003. We found that the average attention on a screen was about 2.5 minutes. And then we did this again in 2012. We found it to be 75 seconds on average. The last 5 or 6 years, there have been about 6 different studies that have all found basically the same thing. So it's my studies, but also others have replicated this. And they found lengths of attention on any screen before switching to be 50 seconds, 44 seconds, 47 seconds. It averages 47 seconds. That's pretty short when you think about it. And let me also point out that the median length of time that we found on any screen is 40 seconds. Median means the midpoint of all our observations. And what that means is that half of all the observations, half of everything that we observe when people are using their devices, is that their attention is shown to be less than 40 seconds on any screen.
It's incredible, Gloria, because, thinking about that as a creator, when I'm not podcasting, I write on social platforms, record videos, all to help grow the podcast and get the message out. And you look at it and think, you have to be writing or recording in a way where you're holding attention really hard, because every 40 seconds, that person wants to change what they're doing. So unless you're compelling with your message, or what you're writing or what you're saying, 40 seconds later, you've lost that listener or that viewer or that reader, which is why I guess they talk about the importance of the retention score is such an important measure for YouTubers, as an example.
Yeah. Well, this is something advertisers have always known, right? And advertisers have always tried to attract people's attention. And advertising, it's a really old field, right? What's new is the idea that people can now computerize things that can attract our attention. So that's algorithms is now, the idea of an algorithm is something we do in everyday life. Cooking a recipe involves an algorithm. But to be able to program information using algorithms in order to capture our attention, this is what's new. At the same time, we're sitting in front of devices where it's so easy for us to switch to something else. I mean, really within milliseconds, we can switch to social media or news or something else. So it's a combination of notifications based on algorithms that can lure us into something. All you have to do is click on it, right? It's so fast. So it's different from having to actually spend some time getting to find that information, right? We now have everything at an instant, and we're sitting in front of the world's largest candy store.
And it's even worse than what people realize. You talked about advertisers there. And when we take a step back, when you look at some of the top creators across any of the social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, whichever one it is, many of the top creators study advertising. And so, as an example, I bought 10 books on copywriting 2 weeks ago. And my goal is to improve my writing on Twitter and with my newsletter through copywriting, because advertisers know how to create that slippery slope, as they call it, that just keeps the reader wanting to move on. So what we're trying to do is we're not trying to have them switching. So we're trying to increase their retention in our material by using advertising techniques, opening loops, not closing them. So drawing them into the material. But when we're doing that, with our content, so is every other
That's right.
major creator. And now this person's it's almost impossible for them not to click on this or click on that because they think, well, that's my friend Ted who wrote that. And it's, well, no, Ted's just advertising his piece of content to you.
Yeah, the digital age has made us all advertisers.
Yes.
And everybody has now all become very clever in trying to attract attention. Our minds have very limited real estate, and everybody is competing to get a piece of that real estate. And us poor users of the technology, we're faced with trying to pay attention to what's really important for us, which is usually getting work done or, having an important communication with a family member or friend. But it becomes harder and harder to do that because of all these other competing forces trying to pull our attention away.
And where do you see that going with algorithms and AI getting stronger and stronger, and the power of the AI with the machine learning now getting looped in to the algorithm? Where's this going to take us in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so machine learning has been around and has been used in developing algorithms for some years now. The machine learning is getting better, so it's getting more precise. There's more information about people's behavior that can be used as features to refine those machine learning algorithms. So it is becoming harder and harder. Now, there's a whole other conversation we can have about how AI might affect our attention. And for example, AI can potentially have benefits in doing tasks that are mundane, tasks that are boring for us, such as creating reports or summarizing information. So AI is pretty good at doing that. We're talking about Chat GPT. The problem, as I see it, though, now, yes, that's a benefit and potentially frees up time for us to do other things that we might find to be more important or that we can use our creative abilities at. The problem, though, is that we become disconnected from that information and we end up producing more and more of that information. Why? Because we can, right? Producing faster is not necessarily a good thing, right? We'll be producing more information, but ultimately it means more information for us to consume. And you might argue, well, the AI can consume that information and we can have agents, software agents conversing with each other about that information and leave humans out of the loop. But we still are disconnected from that information. And, in some ways, maybe it's okay if the information is just not relevant or important for us, but we have to understand, at what point we need to be involved in processing that information. We can't be completely disconnected from it. And that's a danger that I see where we're heading.
And two things that jump out at me there. One ties to us as individuals and our ability to learn or synthesize the material. So if we're having the AI do all that, well, oh, the AI can go read it all. Well, it's great, but now it's not in my brain. And if I go into a meeting or I go into a coaching call, I can't draw on that material that I had AI read and summarize for me. So that's one thing I'd love to dive into with you. And the second one is the fact that this is all becoming an arms race, if you will. I was at a mastermind last month, Gloria, and a few business owners were talking about how they're using AI for their SEO campaigns. And they're having the machines. Some people were putting out up to 1,000 articles a day across their various websites through the AI. And I just thought, how is someone who writes I write a weekly newsletter and like eventually, how do you compete with any of these sites that are just spitting out so much content that you get buried? Is the answer that you simply have to continue to become the signal in the noise? And so all these people that are doing the arms race, that's the noise. And as long as we're creating signal value add material, we'll cut through that.
I think that's a really good way to put it. So people who are just churning out thousands of articles at a time, what they may not realize is they're churning it out, but people may not read them. From a probabilistic perspective, yeah, there's a good chance if you send out 1,000 articles a week or a day, there's a good chance someone might read some of them because you've got enough out there, you've cast a wide net. But it may not be the articles that you really want people to read, that you really, have an intent for people to read. So yes, people are creating a lot of noise. Now, I did an experiment with students in my class where I had them use ChatGPT to summarize articles. And for years, when I've taught the course, I've always had students summarize the articles and write their reflections on it. And then I would talk about the article in the next lecture. And I did it because it gives students a chance to really process the material. You're forced to summarize it, you're forced to write reflections on it. This time, I had them use ChatGPT, and then I asked them about their experiences with it. And guess what? Students did not like this. They said, yeah, the ChatGPT did a really good job of summarizing it, but not a good job of providing insights. And so then I switched and I had the students do their summaries, then have ChatGPT do a summary, and then have students revise their original versions and do a comparison. And they said, no, they themselves were able to provide much more insight and better reflections on these articles than the GPT could, because the GPT is very good at summarizing facts, but it's not so good at coming up with creative ideas or insights.
And how, when you're teaching nowadays, are you even able to know whether they're using ChatGPT to do their writing or whether they're doing it on their own? I mean, we all, not all, but we got a message from our oldest son's school this week about, back to school. Then there was a section about academic honesty. And it talked about, hey, with the rise of AI, we want to remind your kids, like, let's not have AI write all our homework. So how do we look for this? And then also, how should we be incorporating that to improve the student experience?
Yeah. So the short answer is we can't know. We can't. When I started my course, I began by saying you're not allowed to use GPT, and we'll know if you do. And of course, I was bluffing because there was absolutely no way that I could know if they were using GPT or not. Maybe the only way I could know is if everybody produced the same. If I see, if I saw 20 students producing exactly the same or very similar summaries, then I might know. But otherwise, there is just no way to really know. It's a challenge that we're facing. And I think that's students, we really need to incorporate into education the idea that if students really want to learn, they've got to be able to process the information on their own. And, you can use GPT for some things, but we need to communicate to students that they're not going to learn. If you really want to be able to compete in this world, you have to learn how to process, understand, synthesize, and reflect on material by yourself. So I think the best way to counteract that is to communicate to students the value of what they can gain by doing this themselves as opposed to using GPT.
Oh, I love that. And as we start to tackle, like, how do we deal with all of this? One thing that jumped out at me that you talked about was this idea of free will versus determinism. And you talked about this idea of soft determinism. What does that look like, and how does that tie into this conversation on attention span?
Yeah. So there's, a very popular narrative that, our attention is because it's captured by algorithms and tech companies have so much power over our attention, there's not much people can do. And that's an argument that's saying, we just don't have free will anymore. Our everything we're doing online is controlled by tech companies and algorithms. The argument of free will is that people have complete free choice about their behavior, where they can pay attention. Soft determinism is an argument that's somehow in between. It's saying, given the context, given the situation you're in, you can have free will. You can make a choice. For example, a person who is born into poverty has a much more limited set of circumstances in their choice about what they can do in their lives compared to someone who's born into wealth. So someone who's born into wealth, maybe they get to go to a private school and the private school enables them to go into a top university. Maybe they have connections with their family to get into a top law firm and they can make partner and so on. Person born into poverty, they have a lot more struggles. Maybe they can go first to a community college if they're determined to go to a university. They can maybe transfer into a public university. They may have the same dream of being a lawyer, but they may not have the connections that the wealthy person has. So they have this limited set of circumstances, but they can still have free will to make choices within those circumstances. We're all born into a unique set of circumstances. And so I do believe that people have free will within the limitations. Similarly, if we think about our choices when we're online, yes, we're confronted with algorithms. We have social forces because we're social creatures. Sometimes it's hard to work against our social natures. We want to communicate with people. We're curious. We want to find out what people are saying on social media. We have personalities that can kind of shape the way that we pay attention. For example, if you happen to be born with a trait of neuroticism, it's much harder to pay attention than someone who's not neurotic. Someone who's conscientious, we find checks email a lot more frequently than someone who's not. Those are all examples of the kinds of constraints that we're faced with. But despite these constraints, we can still make choices. So a person who's neurotic can still extend their attention span. They have more challenges than someone who's not neurotic.
And you just mentioned there, and we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. You talked about email and possibly one of the greatest sources of distraction for a lot of the human population. Can you tell our listeners about the experiment that you did where you shut it off for an entire week in a company? And what was the impact on the workplace where you did that?
Yeah. So, first of all, it took me 6 years to find a company willing to cut off email. So, that was not an easy task. I had to convince them that this will find results that might be beneficial for them. But I finally did find a company and we cut off email for one work week for a period of 5 days. And we found that when email was cut off, that people could focus significantly longer on their screens. We also found that people were less stressed when they didn't have email. And so, it's interesting. And of course, once the email came back, people reverted back to their old habits. So, we probably didn't do this experiment long enough, but it was enough time to prove that email causes stress. There is causality there. It causes stress. And also, causes us to focus less often. In another study, we find that people check email on average 77 times a day. And so if you want to know why people are not focused, it's because they're always moving back and forth from their task at hand to email. So, the other thing we found that was very interesting is that without email, people actually moved around more. Now, they had access to their phones. We didn't cut off their phones. They could have called someone up to ask a question, but they actually preferred to go and visit someone in their office and have a face-to-face conversation. Sometimes they went to another building to find a person or to another floor, and people reported having a much better social experience without email. So it seems like a no-brainer to, restrict email. The problem we face, of course, is that we don't have a good alternative to email. Of course, there's Slack, but, I have my own opinions about Slack and distraction. I think it distracts us even more than email.
That's where I was going to go immediately, because I have when I'm not podcasting or creating on social media, I'm a CFO of a company. I have a team of about 33, 34 colleagues, and we use Teams, not Slack. But my gosh, when I'm walking by some people's desks, it appears they have 6 Teams conversations going on at once. It's okay, well, we have our lunch conversation. What are we going to eat for lunch? And we spend an hour together talking about that. We have our conversation with these 4 people gossiping about A, B, and C. We have these 4 work conversations going on at the same time. And meanwhile, we're trying to do our job. And I just look at that and say, how can someone conceivably be productive or have mental sanity when they have 6 Slack conversations or Teams conversations going on at once?
Yeah, that's an example of unintended consequences of technology, because it seemed like such a great idea. But, it's a lot of different threads for people to keep track of. Of course, people report they like the fact that Slack can separate different groups and different threads of conversation. But nevertheless, it has resulted in more information being produced, more communication. And there is an expectation, because Slack is a text kind of media, there's an expectation that you'll respond fast, right? Whereas email is what's called asynchronous. So someone can write an email and you have a grace period before you can respond. So, you can, not to make a pun, but you can cut some slack for people to allow them to spend more time before they answer. But with Slack, there is this expectation shared among all people in the Slack channel that you're going to respond fast and that you're going to pay attention to that information.
Yeah, and let's spend a minute or two on that one, because that one's getting me in trouble a bit. Because one of the things I've tried to do is, I think through COVID, that expectation went up more and more because we were working from home. We weren't in person. So people were like, well, you're always on your computer, so responses should be immediate. If I email you, if I Slack you, you should be replying back. If I let you know, hey, you didn't sign that invoice, you should pop in and sign it. Like, you should be on top of things. And part of my realization when we went back to the start of the conversation, I said that was a killer for me. It destroyed my focus and I felt miserable and unproductive. One of the things I've done is I have put my phone in do not disturb mode 24/7. So it's always do not disturb. It's not quite airplane mode, but it's pretty close. Goes in my pocket. I don't check it. I go to my meetings. I have conversations. I'm working. Now I'm not so great at doing my email batching, even though we talked about that. That doesn't actually limit stress, because when I go to it, now I have 50 emails, so the stress comes back. But what I'm trying to do is say, hey, I'm going to work on what I need to get done versus always responding to these little tiny fires that are happening 100 times a day. But one of the challenges that's presenting is the person on the other side. They're looking at it and they're like, this guy never reads my Slacks. He never responds to my emails. He doesn't pick up his phone. He doesn't answer his texts. Like, what's going on? Like, why isn't he doing what I need him to do?
Yeah.
And so we're almost being forced by our colleagues. And I love you, all my colleagues. This isn't personal. This is for everyone who's listening and you. But we're being forced to have less attention in order to appease their desire for us to respond fast enough to keep them happy. Like, it's almost forcing each other into this downward spiral of attention span in order to keep everyone happy and smiling.
Yeah. So what you're pointing out is the idea that there are unequal benefits to electronic communications. So the sender of the message is the person who gets the benefits, and the receiver is the one who has to sacrifice their time and their energy to respond. So there's always this unequal balance between sender and receiver, whether it's email or Slack. Slack has intensified this imbalance because of this expectation that you'll respond fast. So people feel, the receiver of these Slack messages feels a bit under pressure. They may not realize it consciously, but they are under pressure that you're expected to follow these Slack channels and respond fast. Of course, you're hoping someone else in the group is going to respond, but it doesn't let you off the hook. Email is, it's also bad with email because someone might target you directly and say, hey, I need this information from you. And of course, you're the receiver of the message. You're the one tasked with doing the work. And the sender is the one who benefits from it. So there's this economics of electronic communication that's really, it's unfair, right? The work is not distributed fairly.
It makes me think I read the book Buy Back Your Time recently and had a conversation with Dan Martell about it. One of the concepts he had in it was if you have an executive assistant or a virtual assistant, he does not read an email that has not already been read once. And so it's training his executive assistant to answer any email that comes in. And if there are ones that come in that they may feel they can't answer, every morning there's a meeting and it's okay, well, let's go through the ones you couldn't answer and I'll train you how to answer them next time. And so now he doesn't have to look at email, and just having that conversation with him, I felt a little bit of trepidation, but way more, my gosh, that has to happen, because if I can have someone answer every email I ever get and never look at email again, life can't help but be so much better than it is with that wonderful and horrible invention that email is.
Yeah, we're probably going there. We're probably going to in a direction where every person can have a virtual assistant to handle their email. There's good and bad in that. The good, as you point out, saves us a lot of work, saves us a lot of energy, might be less distracting, but it's not completely roses in the sense that we become disconnected from this information. And so there may be some messages that it's really important for us to be part of and for us to be able to answer. So we're going to have to figure this out when we do start using virtual assistants, right? We don't want that assistant to decide you don't need to respond to your mother's email, right? Because that's not going to be a good idea. So we're going to have to sort this out. And, but, ultimately we want to create a more equal balance, more fairness in between the sender and receiver of electronic communications. It's electronic communications it's not all bad, right? We get a benefit, right? But
100%.
But it's really important to make sure that the benefits outweigh the costs.
Yeah, and even going to video chat, I often find it funny when you will see three colleagues that are in a triangle that must be 5 feet by 8 feet by 10 feet, and they're having a Zoom convo. And I'm thinking to myself, you're all right there. Like, why aren't you just standing up and like this is, and you're in the middle of it. And you're just hearing a Zoom conversation from three people. You're thinking, why are you doing that to my ears? Like, why don't you just walk over to that meeting room 6 feet away? We'll get away from electronic communication for a minute. So we talked about free will before we went down our electronic communication rabbit hole. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is, and this ties to how we start to address the attention span. You talked about this idea from Bandura's research, where he concluded that human agency has four properties: intentionality, forethought, self regulation, and self reflection. Can you take our listeners through those at a high level, and maybe we dive into one or two of them
Sure.
as we start to wind up?
So the first property, intentionality, was what I had discussed earlier, the idea of, because we have so many things we do that are automatic, that are unconscious, we need to raise them to our conscious attention. And if we do that, we become more aware of what we're doing, and we can form a plan. We can be intentional about what we're doing. So before I have this urge to go on social media, I can become aware, oh, wait a minute. I see my fingers are going toward, hitting on that tab for social media. Let me reflect on it. Why do I need to go to social media right now? Do I need to? No, I don't. It's a habit. In fact, there was a participant in one of my studies. We actually tested a software that blocks distractions, and people could choose what distractions to block. And nearly everybody chose social media. And this guy reported how he had muscle memory in his fingers, even though he knew intellectually that he couldn't access Facebook and Twitter. His fingers would automatically go to start typing in Facebook to get to the Facebook URL or clicking on the tab. So that's the first idea, is intentionality, to understand those things we're doing that are automatic. And there's a lot of things we do on our devices that are automatic, and to form a plan about what we can do, such as, here's the reward I'm going to give myself if I can spend 30 more minutes working on this, or just the reward of finishing something, writing the end of a chapter. You feel so rewarded. So the next property is the idea of forethought. And forethought is imagining how your current actions are going to affect yourself in the future. And I think it makes the most sense to think about where you want to be at the end of the day. And if you're someone and you can easily spend 30 minutes on social media, or you can spend an hour playing Candy Crush, pause and visualize your end of the day. Now, where I want to be is I want to be sitting on my couch, maybe drinking a glass of wine, reading my favorite book or article. And probably the most important thing is, how do I want to feel at the end of the day? I want to feel fulfilled and rewarded. I want to feel good. I don't want to visualize myself still working on that overdue report that was due at 5:00, right? I want to visualize myself being peaceful and happy. And that's enough to help us stay on track. So the more concrete of a visualization, and it's something that you can practice, the more concrete of a visualization you can come up with, the better able you are to be able to hold off those distracting forces and stay on track. The third property is self-regulation. And it's important to consider that not everybody was born lucky with a good trait of self-regulation. It is a personality trait. So some people do have a tendency to have very good self-regulation. Unfortunately, not everybody, and a lot of people don't have this personality trait. I think quite a large number of people don't. So they have to find ways to help them self-regulate. So, for example, I talk about the idea of creating hooks. So if you know that you're someone who you like to play games, and of course I like to play games as well, but you know you're someone who can get trapped, right? We talked about the rote attention trap. So create a hook. In other words, you play the game 10 minutes before you have a meeting. And let's say you've just been through, you've finished some work and you feel pretty exhausted and you want to just kind of calm yourself before you go into your next meeting. It's okay. You can play a game for a few minutes. We do know that this kind of rote attention, which is easy, engaging, it actually makes people happy and calms them. So it's not a terrible thing. The part that's terrible is when you can't pull out. It's when you can't stop, right? If you do it more than a few minutes, that's the part that's not good. So create a hook, which is the next meeting. Or, if you're in a doctor's office and you're waiting, okay, it's okay to do it until your name is called to go see the doctor. These are external hooks that can help pull you out. So if you know you're someone who can get trapped, right, you can think about designing this kind of hook. So there are other things you can do to self-regulate. Keep your environment clear so that there's less chance of being distracted. If you're someone who's distracted by your phone, put your phone in a drawer, leave it in another room, right? I had a colleague who was astonished that when I walk into another room, I don't carry my phone with me. I said, how can you not have your phone with you at all times? Well, we can, right? You can leave it in another room. And you're much less likely to get up and walk into another room to grab your phone than if the phone were right next to you. There's things that we can do. There's plans you can make to help self-regulate, especially if you're a person who's not born lucky with a trait of strong self-regulation. And the last thing, reflection and course correction, is something, it's really important. And that's to understand the reasons why you are distracted. For me, it's generally because I'm bored and because I just don't want to do the work. And so understand, like, what's behind, why don't I want to do that work? Well, maybe my goal isn't strong enough, right? The goal of completing this, where it's not clear. So make that goal clear and think about the reward you get for finishing. So that's a way to help reflect and course correct. And, there are other ways that we can reflect as well on our behavior.
Oh, that was beautiful. That was actually a pretty deep summary on each one, so we won't have to go deeper. Gloria, what I'd love to do is fire a rapid fire 4 questions at you.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll do my best.
What is a book that's had a major impact on change in your life?
There have been several books. Actually, I would go back to William James, who wrote his book in the 1890s. And he had some really profound ideas and profound things to say about attention. So I love that. I also loved Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
Was also a great influence on me.
Yeah, and I still get blown away. All I remember not all, but the main one I remember is the study with the parole hearings, if you will, or case reviews. And if you had it just before lunch,
right,
you're more likely to get parole denied. It's because someone wanted to go have their sandwich. Just such a crazy thought, how much impact that's had on people's lives over the last, let's say, 100 years. Just incredulous. Okay. And what are you reading right now? What's on your shelf, Gloria?
Oh, I'm reading a book called Hacking of the American Mind. And it's by Robert Lustig, who's a physician at University of California, San Francisco. And he talks about how drug companies have just, captured our minds and behavior, especially through sugar, the sugar industry. And, sugar is addicting. It causes metabolic diseases. And, it's very similar to how our attention is grabbed online. Once we get introduced to sugar, it can be very hard to stop. And we're surrounded by sugar in soft drinks, fast food, processed food. And this supports the sugar industry, and it's really bad for our health.
I'm going to have to check that one out. I love the sound of it. What is something in the last, let's say, 12 to 18 months that Gloria has bought for under $1,000 where you've said, I wish I'd bought that sooner?
Oh, I have to think about that. So the last, we're given
let's say 18
time.
months. Let's give you a year and a half.
Can I have like 3
2
years?
Yeah,
3
sure,
years?
sure.
Okay. I would say my Aura ring.
The Aura ring for your sleep?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really helped me a lot. And I've learned a lot about my sleep patterns when my sleep is bad. It's helped me gain insight into what's causing my bad sleep. And it gives you a lot of precise information about when you woke up. So I can think about what I ate before I went to bed, what I thought about before I went to bed. And I find, for example, if I read something that's more meditative, I actually sleep better, right? If I read something before I go to sleep. So it certainly helped me.
And in your life, what's one habit, behavior, or mindset shift that's really had a material impact on your life?
Well, this goes way back, and that's exercising. And I run just about every day, and it's really important. And I feel like my day isn't complete until I actually get out and run. Right now, temporarily, I'm living in New York City for a few months. And you might think, wow, New York City, it's so urban. There's, there's traffic and noise. But I live near a park, and I go out in the park every day. Beautiful park, beautiful nature and flowers. And I really soak all that in. And that's just the best thing I can do.
I am with you. I had a period of time where I did a run streak for 1.5 years, and it was fabulous. Starting last week, I have a 6-day pickleball streak going, and that is the best experience I've ever had. I'm averaging about 4 hours a day. So I get obsessed, Gloria, and I think pickleball streak ends today. I'm going for a hike with some colleagues, so I'm going to have to put it away, and I'm distraught. I've started dreaming about pickleball.
Wow.
It's a little disturbing. I might
I'll have to try it. Yeah.
Oh, it's just fabulous. Just so fabulous. It's one of those ones where you want like fastest growing sport in history. Like, is that even real? Then you go play and think, wow, like, how didn't I start this sooner? Everybody needs to play. But I'll try to stop not being a pickleball evangelist. And so we went pretty wide and deep on attention span. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure you hit the listeners with?
Well, I just want to reinforce one of the main points of the book, which is, let's reframe our goal in using tech. And this goes for business leaders as well as information workers, as well as students, as well as even people who don't work, stay-at-home moms and dads. And let's put well-being first. Let's have our main goal in using tech in keeping us with positive well-being, because when we feel positive, we can do more. And we seem to be on this course instead of using tech to exhaustion, getting ourselves exhausted, because technology has created the capability for us to do more, produce more, consume more. But let's back off and let's think about our well-being, and we'll end up being more productive by doing that.
And where can our listeners find you?
So you can find me on www.gloriamark.com. That's my website. I am shortly will be starting a Substack newsletter, but you'll be directed to that when you get to my website. You can find me on Twitter, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I love to hear from people. And so, I would be very happy for people to contact me.
Excellent. Thanks for joining me on the show today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
If you like the podcast, you'll love our new newsletter, The Growth Guide. Every Thursday, straight to your inbox, with the goal to help you be better, achieve more, and become financially free. Check it out at our website, thegrowth.guide. Subscribe and learn more.